Hello and welcome to The Radical. I'm Christina.
And I'm Nicole. On our podcast, we delve into the roots of metaphysical wisdom.
That's right, Nicole. Our podcast is all about exploring those fundamental truths and practices that nourish your mind, body, and spirit.
Yes, Christina, we want to make metaphysical concepts easy to understand and accessible, especially for those who don't have a ton of time to do all the research.
Right? We'll do the research as well as share our experiences and perspectives, hoping to empower you, our listener, to find balance and magic in your day-to-day.
Inspired by the essence of the word radical, proceeding from the root, let's explore the roots of well-being and self-healing together.
This is The Radical with Christina and Nicole, two metaphysical girls in the material world.
Hello and welcome to The Radical. I'm Nicole.
And I'm Christina.
Today we're talking about rhythms and cycles. I didn't even really look at what Christina listed out for us, but I know I'm talking about biophotons.
And listeners, I don't know what a biophoton is. And I saw her notes and I felt like I was in the wrong college class. And I walked in and I was like, I'm here for the 101. And I walked into like the graduate level. So I just kind of skimmed it and I was like, I'll wait until Nicole explains to me what all of that is.
The title we're playing with is the Rhythms of Our Interconnectedness. That's a really beautiful theme that will kind of be throughout the podcast episode today. So Christina will start us off in segment 1, biophotons, in segment 2, and then we'll wrap up with 2 messages from the universe.
2 messages. I got very overwhelmed very quickly looking at rhythms in nature and in the universe. And then I had to structure it so that I was just going to talk about a few. So listeners, there's a lot more out there. I'm just going to cover the basics, the 101 level, shall we say, some of the basics, and tying it to a little bit of the birth chart energy that we were talking about. I seem like I can't have any conversation lately that doesn't include Jupiter. Jupiter's here with us today. I'm talking about the rhythm and the cycle of Jupiter. Surprise, surprise. But I didn't go very far out. I'm going to start with the 4 biological rhythms. And this is just factual information. There's the circadian rhythm, the dineural rhythm, the ultradian rhythms, and the infradian rhythms. These are all related to our human body. Circadian rhythm, you may have heard that word before. That's the 24-hour cycle that includes physical, mental, and behavioral changes in our bodies. This is mostly affected by light and dark. It's our basic sleep-wake cycle. It also has to do with hormone release, body temperature, and alertness as it's like affected by our hormones and what we're doing in that 24-hour period. When we eat, when we rest, when we work out. And if you ever type in circadian rhythms into a YouTube search, there are so many brilliant videos and TED Talks on the importance of knowing and maintaining your circadian rhythm for optimal health and well-being. Dineural rhythms specifically is about the day-night cycle. Ultradian rhythms are biological rhythms that happen more than once a day. Short periods of time with higher frequency than a circadian rhythm, which is a 24-hour period. These are within our sleep cycle. We have rapid eye movement and, the stages of sleep. That's an example of an ultradian rhythm, but also our blood pressure, right? Going up and down, and our heart rate, and our it says feeding cycles and our eating cycles are considered ultradian rhythms. So a cycle within a cycle. Finally, we have infradian rhythms, and these are rhythms that are longer than 24 hours but shorter than a year. These are rhythms outside of that 24-hour, and these are affecting our mood and metabolism and mental health. The two biggest examples for humans are menstrual cycles for menstruating people and seasonal depression. I'm sorry, I'm laughing at seasonal depression, but that we're just coming out of it. And Nicole and I have been talking about the winter for a very long time and the effect it has had on us. But maybe laughing is one of the antidotes for seasonal depression. But if this is still, so that's infradian rhythms, there's a lot more examples in the natural world, in mammals and animals, because this includes their molting, hibernation, migration, and breeding cycles. So if that kind of draws everything into a clearer picture. Those are 4 biological rhythms based on a 24-hour period. I want to talk about just a few more, starting with the 24-hour with a day. Now, I'm not going to go into minute by minute, even though I found some really interesting information on hours and minutes and seconds. I'm like, I'm not going to go there today. I want to talk about the Ayurvedic dosha cycle of the day. If you're new to Ayurvedic and the concepts of the 3 main elements of kapha, which is earth and water, pitta, which is fire and water, and vata, which is air and ether. Throughout the day, there's periods, there's blocks of hours that these energies are very high and very prevalent and very low. It kind of gives us an outline of what is the best way for us to spend our hours of the day. This is tied directly to that circadian rhythm as well. There's multiple schools of thought that will give you, the how to, like, the circadian rhythm of your day, like when to eat, when not to eat. I'm just talking about the Ayurvedic one because I find this one to make the most sense to me. Listeners and Nicole, you tell me if this makes sense to you. And the energy of the day in the Ayurvedic dosha cycle is following the sun and the temperature and the energies of the day. Between 6 a.m. and 10 a.m., these are kapha hours, which is earth and water. This is a slow, calming, almost sluggish time of the day. If you don't wake up before 6 a.m., you might find yourself struggling to wake up within the kapha hours, because this is when everything is starting to warm up. Everything's starting to wake up. That's the energy of that time. Between 6 and 10 a.m., it's very good to have a slow, mindful morning with light activity. That might be your stretching or your gentle yoga or going for a walk during that time frame. 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., this is pitta. This is when the sun is reaching its highest point. This is the time of productivity, getting things done. Your biggest meal should be in that time frame because then you have the fire in the body and the heat in the body to digest. 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. is vata time, and vata is air and ether. This is when the day is cooling down and you're coming out of that pitta energy, and then you're in a space where everybody might need something different. Generally, this is the time for creative projects and expansive thinking, meditation, but also reading and writing and journaling, because the air energy is mental energy. But it's not a like get out and get things done energy. It's a be in your headspace and solve problems energy. Does that make sense?
It sounds like a flow state.
Yes. 6 p.m. to 10 p.m., we're back in Kapha. Do you remember it was 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. Kapha? So now we're 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. Kapha. The day is closing. The energy from the sun is cooling down, and all the energy and the animals and everything is coming back to the earth. Settling into the evening, this is a good time for light activity, like a walk after a very light evening meal, and try to fall asleep before 10. Because you remember 10 to 2 is pitta. And you might find that it's difficult to fall asleep during pitta energy because that was that productivity time. The heat in the body rises. If you're not asleep during this time, you might get hungry. You might be looking for snacks. You might be looking for something to do. But what we should be doing, or what's best, is to be snuggled up in our beds with our internal fire burning, digesting our food, digesting our day, internal cleansing, processing our thoughts. Our body needs that internal digestion between 10 and 2 a.m. 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. Do you wake up at 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning?
I do sometimes.
This could be why there's a shift in energy. 2 a.m. to 6 a.m., we're back in Vata. The difference between this Vata time and the Vata time we had in the afternoon is that with this quiet time of the day, the sun, I mean, it has to do with the moon cycle, and but essentially we are mentally receptive during this time. This is the time for meditation, spiritual practices, mantras, and usually waking up and giving yourself time in the morning for that. And when we did rituals, morning rituals, did we talk about all the science and why our brains are ready to do this type of stuff when we first wake up?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's
Mhm.
Vata energy. So this is a fascinating thing. Listeners, all this information is available. You could Google it, you could, whatever your search engine is, there's beautiful illustrations and different graphs and all this other stuff for the Ayurvedic times of day. For me, it makes sense and it feels right in my body to follow that rhythm. So that was the day. We're getting a little bit more expansive now. We're going to talk about the lunar cycle, 1 month. 29.5 days is the lunar cycle. And the cycle refers to the different phases of the moon as it orbits the earth, as the earth orbits the sun, and everything's spinning around each other. That's why it appears to change shape. That's why we have 8 main cycles of the moon: new moon, waxing crescent, first quarter, waxing gibbous, full moon, waning gibbous, third quarter, waning crescent. And I learned from Nicole when we were doing this podcast that gibbous means to be humpbacked.
Yeah.
Because that is it appears that the moon has like a little, it appears to have a bulge on one side of it. And you explained to us the difference between waxing and waning, which I found very fascinating. But this cycle, 29.5 days, it's caused by the Earth, Moon, and Sun's relative positions in space. And this will affect our sleep patterns, activity levels. I mean, animals use the moon's energy and light for a lot of their cycles as well. Humans have become separated from, the natural light of outside, so we might not be affected as much. But the more you become aware and the more you pay attention, the more you can follow the energy of the moon to assist you in your manifestations and intentions. The solar cycle, the rhythm of the sun. 1 year, 365 days, 5 hours, 48 minutes, and 46 seconds is one solar year. This is the rhythm of the year, the calendar. The calendars humans have created, to include the one we use today, the Gregorian calendar, the one before that, the Julian calendar. the tropical solar calendars that are used in astrology, the sidereal solar calendars that are used in other cultures. These are all humans' way of marking the 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 cycle of the sun based on the solstice and the equinoxes, because we can measure the sun's year, the shortest day of the year and the longest day of the year, and that is in earth-based spirituality, the wheel of the year. But this affects us because it's light, temperature, energy levels. We act differently when it's cold and when it's hot, and when the sun sets at 4:30 and when the sun comes up earlier. When the animals act differently, if you have pets, if you're taking care of other animals, the nature of the year, the whether it's agriculture or whether it's just your work, just your children's school year, just your college year, your academic year. We are affected by these things. And these rhythms, we could be more closely aligned to them the more we pay attention to essentially the amount of light that we're getting. But when I was looking at the circadian rhythm, the scientists were saying that humans evolved because we live on this planet with the moon and the sun that we have, that we have a sleep wake cycle because we have a moon and a sun orbiting the way that they do. What we have grown very separate from is our solar cycle and the seasons and the wheel of the year, and how we can get to a better state of health and happiness if we eat seasonally and we rest properly and we take cues from nature of when is it time to start a big project and when is it time to plan a big project. When do we need to go into a hibernation and when do we need to go outside and get more active? The solar year is kind of our amount of time that gives us all the seasons. And then from there out, we just start expanding. I'm not doing a lot, listeners. I'm going to do Jupiter cycle, 12 years. I think that this is a point to me because I just had 1, 2, 3, 4. I just had my fourth Jupiter cycle. So ancient civilizations, particularly the Chinese, incorporated Jupiter's roughly 12-year orbital cycle into their calendar systems, marking years based on the positions, zodiac, a Jovian year.
Oh.
And that's a 12-year period. But in Jupiter's movement through the constellations, this planet is massive and it's visible and it's very steady. So every 12 years, Jupiter returns back to the exact spot it was when you were born. You have a Jupiter return when you're 12, 24, 36, 48. That's the one I just had. 60, 72, 84, 96, and beyond. And that is periods of the time in your life when you are experiencing or ready to receive growth, expansion, and opportunity, and many other attributes to Jupiter. I love that. It's always good to have a little luck coming your way.
We don't talk much about Jupiter returns.
Mm-hmm.
It's more common to hear the Saturn return, which I think is about every 30 years.
What? And I didn't look up Saturn. So, listeners, I'm all about Jupiter right now. I think Jupiter is in my sign. I know Nicole, you and I were talking about that last week, which was giving me so many big ideas. I'm under the influence of Jupiter right now. I only talked about Jupiter. That's a 12-year cycle, a 12-year rhythm. Another way that we can measure our life. Like, where were you when you were 36? Where do you want to be when you're 48? My next Jupiter return is 60. I have big plans for 60. I've touched on it a little bit, Nicole, when you and I have been talking about it, but I've got big plans for when I turn 60. I'm going to do whatever I want when I get to 60. I just have to get there. Hopefully my 20s and my 30s don't catch up to me in my 50s. I need to live through my 50s, but when I hit 60, it is on. But all the Oh, and you talked about Saturn, so we touched on all the planets have a cycle. If a planet is calling to you, find out what its cycle is, find out where it is in your birth chart, and see if it's visiting you again. But that's another cycle that we have access to that we can reflect upon. It's a generational themes, generational rhythms, and it's a cycle that can be tracked with your birth chart.
If Saturn is a 30-year cycle, then that means at age 60, you have Jupiter and Saturn revisiting you.
Listeners, we did a planning meeting yesterday, and we were talking about a podcast that we wanted to do, and I suggested one that was called Life Lessons, and about Saturn. Saturnian themes, and life lessons based on experiences, right? But the thing with Saturn is that those aren't always the life lessons that you want to experience. Most of my Saturn life experiences were opportunities for growth, which were times of great difficulty for me. Anyway, we'll get to that. Well, more to look forward to on a Saturn. I don't even know if that's a word. Saturnian.
I think it sounds like a word.
If we can have Jovian, I'm gonna have Saturnian cycles and rhythm.
Shakespeare made up something like 1,600 words, so you're
Oh, I
allowed.
love that. Okay, so that's a 12-year cycle, a 12-year rhythm, something that is always coming around. So guess what? We've got a 22-year solar flare cycle. I remember when we were doing the sun, Nicole covered this so well. So if you haven't heard it, listeners, go back and listen to, what was that called? Our sun. And you talked about solar flares and all the effects that they have on us, our technology, our energy levels, our receptivity, downloads, all kinds of stuff.
Yes. And we are at the solar maximum point of this current solar cycle that we're in.
That's right. 2025 is supposed to be a big one. So that's a 22-year-old, 22 cycle. And then the last, as far out as I went, because you could go much further out with all the planets and all the other celestial bodies, is, have you ever heard this, Nicole? Every 33 years, the sun and the moon realign positions at the same time and space.
Oh.
Have you heard this?
No, I don't think so.
I have not heard this. Since a lunar year is shorter than a solar year, the lunar calendar gradually drifts out of sync with the seasons. It takes 33 years for it to fully cycle back to the same position. It's a time when the lunar cycle aligns with the solar cycle. The phases of the moon will occur at roughly the same time of year as they did 33 years prior. It's a resetting. Because we know that the Earth spins and wobbles. That's why we have the precession of the equinoxes, and the sun has an effect on the Earth and the moon. So everything is kind of ebbing and flowing. Now, I did not see when this was happening. As I'm reading this, I'm like, I didn't even look up the date. I just found this piece of information and I didn't even look up when it was happening.
I wonder if it's soon or if it has happened recently, because so many astrologers talk about a lot of different convergences and cycles resetting like this at the same kind of time.
When is the next 33 cycle date? January 2025. Nicole, it just happened.
I had a feeling.
According to current understanding of lunar solar cycles, the next 33-year cycle would occur around January 2025 and is considered a major lunar standstill, marking the completion of a full cycle from the previous major standstill, which was about 1987. So we're entering the next 33 year cycle. That's as far out as I went. That's just a little taste of rhythms and cycles. We can start small and then we can work our way out as far out as we want, depending on what time and what scale and what and amount of time we want to look at for our goals, our healing, our manifestations. We have so many cycles and so many rhythms that we can use.
Are you ready to talk about biophotons?
I'm ready for you to explain to me what they are. You, listeners, she even has a picture of like a purplish outline of a person. Is that a person?
It is a person. It looks kind of creepy.
It's like a ghost.
It does. If Christina feels like the college student who walked into the wrong classroom, I feel like the TA who's trying to cover for the professor who's out sick. This is a totally new concept to me. And I was telling Christina before we hit record, this found its way to me, coincidentally, if you will. I was reading a new book that I got on astrology, and chapter 3 of this book was talking about rhythms, cycles. It was talking about circadian rhythms, biological rhythms,
Yeah.
diurnal cycles. And it also mentioned that in addition to these different breakdowns of the 24-hour cycle, like you mentioned in Ayurvedic medicine or Ayurvedic studies, there's a breakdown in traditional Chinese medicines with the elements and the yin and yang organs. So anyway, in this chapter, the author talked about biophotons. Like I said, it was like this information found me. I wasn't reading this book for this episode. So anyway, it kind of blew my mind. So biophoton, if we break down the root words, bio means life, photon means light. A life light, the light of our life.
Are we biophotons?
We emit them and we absorb them.
Okay.
So
okay.
the strict scientific definition, biophotons are ultra weak photon emissions, abbreviated UPE, from biological cells, from humans, from plants, animals, anything living. So these are the light particles that are produced by living cells. And because they're ultra weak, light from biophotons on the electromagnetic spectrum are in the range of UV and low visible light. So you do need special equipment to view biophotons or the ultra weak photon emissions.
Is that why this picture looks so creepy? Because they're using a special camera?
Yes. Biophotons tend to be more concentrated at the hands and the face. That's why the face is so much brighter in that picture than the rest of the body. This is not the same as bioluminescence, which would be your jellyfish and your fireflies, that visible glowing. It is thought that light carries information. We talked about this in the sun episode, the light codes. With that, biophotons, it is thought, are used as a way for cells of living organisms to communicate, to share information. Like I mentioned, biophotons are both absorbed and emitted. In humans, our cells naturally release biophotons due to biochemical reactions, such as oxidative processes. We'll talk more about that later on, but just know that these are natural processes, natural reactions, things that are happening in our body without us having to do anything. DNA is believed to be a key source of biophoton emission because our DNA regulates various biological rhythms, a lot of the rhythms Christina mentioned, as well as communication within our body. And biophotons are said to be absorbed, of course, through sunlight, quality food, things like raw fruits and vegetables, and other living organisms, tying back to this idea of communication or signaling. So this concept came about in the 1920s and 30s. There's a scientist named Alexander Gurwitch, and he was known for researching what was called mitogenetic radiation. This is basically biophotons. He just didn't have the ability to study biophotons the way that we later could. Basically, what this scientist contributed was the precursor to the idea of photons in the form of cell signaling. He really was able to study the ability of biophotons to serve as a communicator of giving information, particularly in cell mitosis. That's when cells begin splitting and replicating. And he was studying onion roots. And he was wanting to know how the onion roots knew to start growing. What
Oh.
told the cells to start splitting, replicating, and growing.
That's like the whole thing with the wheel of the year when you plant the seeds at a certain time and then you give them warmth and light and water. But what are you talking to with that seed when you're doing that? Like,
Right.
what part? Oh, that's so
Yeah,
cool.
you're right. There were two parts. The conditions had to be right for the roots to grow. But then he also was able to observe the secondary factor. There was some sort of signal or indicator that initiated the mitosis and therefore the growth. And probably because of the timing and the lack of technology, this was research that more so fell into the metaphysical realm. There wasn't a lot of rigorous scientific data to back up what he was observing. In the 1970s, however, a German biophysicist by the name of Fritz Albert Popp was able to do this rigorous scientific research and data collection. And he discovered that our DNA does emit light in the form of biophotons. So, biophotons are associated with cellular processes. They play a role in our biological regulation. And again, Popp's work was heavily grounded in modern physics and molecular biology. He was able to do a lot of data collection. A study published on the National Library of Medicine's website. And I'm just going to read this word for word. It is tempting at this point to think of biophotons as equivalent to qi energy, as modeled in traditional Chinese medicine, or prana in Ayurveda and yoga. However, it is too early to draw this conclusion. Perhaps there is a dynamic exchange between qi, prana, and biophotons. The photons in the body, in their turn, take part in biocommunication and signaling.
Ooh. The science is right. It's like right there, right? It's like
Yeah.
we're like almost ready for that next huge discovery to be like, here it is. But it's starting to come together.
This research, it really is bridging the gap between the metaphysical and the spiritual and the science. I want to flip back to oxidation and oxidative processes. They're necessary. Our body is engaging in these processes all the time. But of note, oxidative processes result in free radicals. Free radicals do damage our DNA and our cells, but our body has a built-in neutralizer called antioxidants. I feel like that was a buzzword with health foods a number of years ago. So antioxidants neutralize free radicals, and oxidative stress occurs when free radicals exceed the capacity of the antioxidants to do the neutralizing.
Mm-hmm.
And this is pretty well understood in science and healthcare communities. When there's oxidative stress, we start to see the emergence of things like diabetes, stroke, cancer, heart disease, neurodegenerative disorders such as ALS, MS, Parkinson's disease. There is a link between disease, illness, and oxidative stress. Now that we've covered that little bit of science, I want to read some more from the National Library of Medicine.
Okay.
I was nerding out about this yesterday, Christina. The future of medicine is almost here. Okay, so I'm going to read again. Since biophotons are a result of oxidative processes, also there could be complex interrelation between the oxidative processes, biophotons, and chi energy. While the problems of aging and oxidative stress are inherent in any living system, it is also possible to reverse these processes through practice of yoga asanas and meditation. Work is also emerging in this area. If lifestyle confers these problems, obviously changing lifestyle and reversing and mitigating these degenerative processes is also possible.
There it is. Rhythms and cycles and natural following of them.
Yeah, when we're in harmony
Mm-hmm.
with our body, when we're letting these processes happen, when we're not adding more gasoline to the fire.
When we're eating tomatoes when they're in season and they're full of nutrients and prana, when we're sleeping when it's dark, when we are resting when it's cold or hot. You know what I'm saying? We're hot. We're not stressing our bodies. When we are in the flow,
Yeah,
when we are following the rhythms and the cycles, we are working with our body. But that is so fascinating because I talked about hours and years and generations, and you're like, I'm going to talk about your DNA, and you know what I'm saying? Like this is like like the tiniest unit
mm-hmm.
of this rhythm, of this cycle, of this natural cycle in our bodies.
But it's also the title, The Rhythms of Our Interconnectedness,
Mm-hmm.
because our biophotons are emitted at this teeny level of our DNA, but we also absorb biophotons from the sun.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't get too much bigger than the sun
Yeah.
in our solar system, but they're directly interconnected. Maybe these ideas of harmonizing and living in balance and flow maybe started out in the metaphysical realm. Science is now saying these are ways to actually optimize your health, your
Mm-hmm.
longevity, and your well being.
Mm-hmm. That article was talking about chi energy, and then it said what yoga asanas and meditation in the
Mm-hmm.
National Library of Medicine article. And the other part to it too, I loved how you read, if our lifestyle is causing this, then changes to our lifestyle, not extra medicines and prescriptions and surgeries, changes to our lifestyle can mitigate it, can change it,
Yes,
can stop the oxidation from happening if you change your lifestyle.
right. Biophotons can be used for non invasive early diagnosis for cancer.
Hmm.
Using highly sensitive photodetectors, it is observable whether biophoton emissions are stable, of low intensity, and are coherent. Or if there's disease present, it is observable 2C, increased biophoton emission, disrupted coherence. And this indicates metabolic imbalances, cancer, and oxidative stress. It can also be used to look at agriculture and the health of crops. So that same scientist, Fritz Albert Popp, along with another scientist, Barbara Kaler, looked at the biophoton content of eggs in hens that were free range versus hens that were kept in closed cages. And the biophoton content of the eggs laid by hens walking around freely outdoors was 100% more compared to the caged hens. The biophotons of plants change in response to pretty much everything Christina mentioned: the seasons, the time of day, the lunar phases, and calm versus active solar cycles.
Mm-hmm.
In my opinion, it's not a far stretch to take that and extrapolate it and apply it to humans.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't dig into this too much, but it was interesting. You can go to alternative medicine clinics, some of them, and they offer biophoton therapy. And it is stated that biophoton therapy can regulate hormones, neurotransmitters, modulate the immune system, reduce pain and inflammation, and stimulate tissue healing.
Wow. I feel like my version of biophoton therapy would be sitting out in the sunshine and eating some seasonal fruit. Like if it's May where I live, I'd be eating blueberries. That is biophoton therapy as well.
And you know, Christina, the worlds and the waters we swim in, we talk about light beings, light
Yeah.
workers. And this word breaks down to life
Oh
light.
my gosh. That's why when you talked about the heart energy and how it's measurable differences, it's because these biophotons are just beaming and singing and harmonizing everything in our bodies and everything around us.
Yeah. So life light, chi, prana, aura, these are traditionally have been invisible life forces that have fallen into the metaphysical realm. And now we are starting to be able to see them, measure them, and understand the role that they play in our biology. And maybe even as we continue researching how biophotons work in terms of our consciousness and our awareness.
Yeah.
Is this like when people talk about, I can sense your aura or your energy? You know, when you walk into a place and you're like, ooh, it doesn't feel right in here.
Mm-hmm.
Are biophotons responsible for that type of communication, for that signaling? It's really exciting. I really loved researching this, and I'll end segment 2 with a quote. I believe we all dance to a mysterious tune intoned by a photon, the magic photon. And that was Albert Einstein.
I loved that lecture. I loved that lecture, Professor.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm just a TA. I'm just a TA. The professor will be back next week.
I'm glad I stayed in this class, even though it was a graduate level.
I'm glad
That
you
is,
stayed, because it would have really made me insecure as a TA if you got up and left.
my brain is just so full of information right now. I need to reflect on everything that you just said. It's amazing. I love it.
I think for me, what really stood out was we could have started talking about biophotons at the beginning. Christina could have read her list in reverse order. It doesn't really matter where you start because it's all interconnected. And it's really kind of all light dependent. A lot of it is light dependent.
And it is natural. It is DNA. It
Mm-hmm.
is bio. It's biology. So the way to be healthy biologically is to flow with the rhythms that our body is designed to flow with. Whether that's your daily, yearly, 12-year, 33-year, your these our body needs to flow with these rhythms. That is how we produce more light
Mm-hmm.
when we are healthy and happy and rested.
In our yoga community years ago, Christina, I remember a big theme was always, especially in our yin and our restorative classes, we need to let our bodies rest. We kind of
Mm-hmm.
need to get out of the way. Our bodies know what to do if given the right conditions.
Yeah.
When I heard it years ago as like a young yogi, I was like, oh, that sounds really nice. I didn't have this deeper understanding of what that really meant. And after doing this research and hearing what Christina brought forward, also, it's so true. If we give our bodies the right condition, like our literal DNA,
Mm-hmm.
these rhythms will take care of us. We're usually doing something to mess it up.
Yeah. I mean, the latest thing, the most like I'll say basic that I mean, we've said multiple times how Nicole and I both recognize sleep is a key part of our health. Would you I mean, we've said that many times. We need to sleep. We understand that. And I hope everybody understands their sleep cycle and gets really good restful sleep because it is so key to our health and well-being. But reading on your phone versus reading a book, okay? It makes a difference. Our bodies see light. It makes a difference when you're looking at an illuminated object before you go to bed than when you are doing something different. It's a small change. It's a small change.
Mm-hmm.
And it's habits. It's a succession of habits. We need small things, doable things. You don't even need to buy anything.
Mm-hmm.
Just lifestyle changes.
Yeah. I think about 25-year-old Nicole sitting at her office desk in front of her laptop at like
Yeah.
6:30 at night, trying to get caught up, striving, exerting. And that is not the correct time of day to be doing that. And once you start changing your habits, it becomes easier because as you become more in tune with kind of the correct timing,
Yeah.
you can feel it. It's funny. Last night I stayed up a little bit later than normal. It was like 10:30. Guess what I did? You nailed it earlier. I was like, I'm hungry. I need a snack.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Our body, like you said, our body knows what to do. And
Yeah.
it's going to go through these cycles, you know, almost regardless of what we're trying to do. You're
Yes.
trying to concentrate and your body wants to sleep. You're trying to be productive and your head is spinning because you're in your head and you're not in that space to have that fire to do the productive work. Sometimes, like we talk about lifestyle, and I know not everybody is in control of their daily schedule, but there are things you can move around. You can change the time of day you work out. You can change the time of day you host the meeting. You know what I mean? There are some things that you can pay attention to that don't schedule that big meeting for after the biggest meal of the day when you're in vata time because everybody is going to be all over the place. There's big things and there's little things that we can do, and I think you said, Nicole, it starts small. It could be anywhere.
Yeah.
You could reverse it. You could go big. You can go small. You could do one thing a day. I mean, there's so many ways to assist us in getting into this flow state.
My final thought before messages from the universe. We can also attempt to disregard and override the rhythms and cycles, but that is where we get into disease, oxidative stress, metabolic issues, the heart disease, stroke. Your body will whisper, and then it'll talk louder, and then it'll start screaming. You get to choose when and how you enter into acceptance and awareness that you're in a human body.
Yeah.
You're not a machine. And at some point, either by choice or by force, you will be paying attention.
Mm-hmm.
And you could do it from a place of, I want to be in harmony and at ease in my body and preserve these flows and rhythms, or your body will develop disease and then you're in a different, you're now reactive instead of proactive. So the choice is ultimately yours.
You'll get a Saturnian
Mm-hmm.
opportunity for growth in a way that you didn't want it.
Nice. I pulled 2 cards today.
Okay.
The deck I'm using today, the Mystic Mondays Tarot, and this is by Grace Duong. So 2 cards, and our first card is the World, ruled by Saturn.
Saturn.
So the World card in tarot symbolizes completion, achievement, and unity. Finito, a long-term goal has been reached, and you can now sit back and relax. All of the pieces have come together, and you have finally found your place in the world. Celebrate. This is a huge win. Take pleasure and look back at all the progress that you've made from when you first started. Feel proud? Well, you should. It's amazing how much we can achieve when we put our minds to it. There is an acceptance of yourself and others that creates wholeness and unity. You're realizing that you are part of something much larger than yourself and are able to see the big picture much more clearly. With endings come new beginnings. The world could also literally mean that you will be traveling and will experience a new world wherever you decide to adventure. The world is your oyster. And our next card, 7 of Pentacles, but she showed up reversed.
Okay.
And I like the reversed meanings in this guidebook. So, symbolism here: wasted effort, restructure, low return. Having a stake in multiple ventures may appear like a smart move, but can actually leave you exhausted. Efforts may be wasted with little return on investment. Research your next financial move and make a decision on where to go next based off your findings. You will feel more self-assured once you have more information on where you are putting your money and what you can expect from that. Create a system for yourself so that you can automate your decisions and financial actions. Investing does not only pertain to money, but also your time. Where are you putting your efforts? And is your energy being put into the best use of your time? Audit your activities and release the ones that are depleting your energy.
I like it. That's a good message to have when you, like I said, I'm under the influence of Jupiter right now and I have a lot of big ideas. That's a good message to have.
And I think too, at the conclusion of this conversation, edit things out of your life that are going to increase your oxidative stress and take you away from practices that nourish you and restore you.
Yes, that's what it's all about. Thank you for joining us today, listeners.
Thank you so much. We love you, and be good to each other out there. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Radical. The Radical is written and produced by Nicole and Christina.
Listener questions can be emailed to us at theradicalpodnc@gmail.com.
Our Instagram is The Radical Pod.
Music by Van Horton. His Instagram is Van Horton Music.